Today's focus will be the latest developments in the Iran war, and especially something that international observers are increasingly paying attention to: China's relationship to this war, and how deeply China may be affected. The impact on China is being widely underestimated. But first, let's look at the 5 major economic events to watch in the coming week. 5 major economic events to watch. Oil prices, the biggest immediate risk. Iran has now begun enforcing a closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This waterway carries about 20% of global crude oil supply, about 25% of global natural gas supply. President Trump has declared that high-intensity bombing operations may continue for at least 1 week. If the strait remains blocked for even 1 week, global oil prices could surge sharply. This is currently Wall Street's biggest concern. And especially for viewers in China, this matters even more. China is heavily dependent on imported oil. Any sustained oil spike will directly pressure China's economy. The next week could become a dramatic episode in global energy markets. U.S. non-farm payrolls, high-risk Friday. On Friday, the U.S. Labor Department will release February non-farm payroll data. January's report was unexpectedly strong. Markets are now asking, was that a one-time spike? Or is the U.S. labor market truly strengthening? At the same time, there is another risk. If Friday's payroll data comes in significantly below expectations, markets could panic. According to London Stock Exchange data, traders currently expect the first Fed rate cut in July. ING predicts June. But if payrolls disappoint sharply, markets may begin pricing in an earlier rate cut. Friday is therefore a high-risk day, both economically and geopolitically. European PMI data, Monday through Wednesday. Spain, Italy, France, Germany, and the broader Eurozone will release manufacturing and services PMI data. These forward indicators will help us assess economic conditions for March and April. UK Spring Budget Report, Tuesday. The UK Chancellor will present the spring fiscal statement. Markets expect some improvement in public finances. The Debt Management Office will announce bond issuance plans. If fiscal conditions appear stronger, UK bond yields could decline, meaning bond prices rise. China's 2 sessions. China's annual political meetings begin this week. For global investors, the most important question: what GDP growth target will Beijing set? For the past 4 years, President Xi has maintained roughly a 5% growth target. According to Wall Street Journal reporting, ING and Citibank economists expect this year's target may be lowered to around 4.5%. If China officially sets GDP growth below 5% for the first time in years, it would be a major symbolic turning point. China's economic narrative could fundamentally shift. Of course, it is still possible Beijing sticks with around 5%. But current sentiment suggests that is less likely. Iran war, latest developments. Now let's move to the war itself. Ammunition concerns limiting U.S. strategy. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States is racing against time to complete its objectives before interceptor missile stocks run low. President Trump stated that operations may continue for at least 1 week, possibly longer. But U.S. ammunition reserves, especially air defense interceptors, are under pressure. The Pentagon does not disclose exact stockpile levels. However, repeated regional conflicts have steadily depleted defensive systems. U.S. forces have successfully intercepted hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones. But not all were stopped. Some struck targets, particularly in Gulf states closer to Iran. The key constraint is not offensive bombs. It is defensive interceptor missiles. The more Iranian missiles the U.S. destroys, the fewer interceptors it must expend. This makes strike efficiency in the coming week critical. First confirmed U.S. casualties. For the first time, the U.S. has acknowledged combat losses. 3 American service members were killed during operations. Explosions were again reported in Tehran. Iran announced it will launch new waves of attacks on U.S. regional bases. The conflict is clearly not winding down. Graham, threat elimination, not regime change. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the strongest advocates of the war, clarified today, the objective is to eliminate Iran's threat, not necessarily overthrow the regime. He stated, "We will not choose Iran's next leader." He emphasized that after the operation, whoever leads Iran must not possess ballistic missile capabilities or sponsor terrorism. This suggests Washington may not insist on immediate regime change. The door to future coexistence remains open. This sounds like early positioning for how the war might eventually conclude. Strait of Hormuz escalates further. A second commercial vessel was attacked while transiting the strait. Earlier, a sanctioned tanker was struck near Oman. 4 sailors were injured. Iran has warned ships not to enter the strait. This is effectively the enforcement phase of the blockade. Global shipping is now directly affected. U.S. destroys Iranian warship. U.S. Central Command confirmed that American forces destroyed an Iranian Jamaran-class frigate in the Gulf of Oman. The U.S. statement called on Iranian armed forces to lay down their weapons. U.S. denies carrier strike claims. Iran claimed it struck the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. U.S. Central Command denied this, stating no ballistic missile hit the vessel. The carrier continues operations. Strategic assessment. 2 factors will shape the next week: U.S. strike efficiency versus interceptor depletion. Oil market reaction to sustained Hormuz disruption. This is no longer just a regional war. It is a global economic stress test, and China, heavily dependent on energy imports, may face consequences far greater than currently acknowledged. The next 7 days will be critical. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a phone call with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about the Iran war. According to Xinhua, Wang Yi said China has always opposed the use of force in international relations, and that the U.S. and Israel launching strikes during ongoing talks, including openly killing leaders of a sovereign state, is unacceptable. Lavrov responded that U.S.-Israeli strikes severely damage Middle East stability, and Russia's position aligns with China. This statement highlights something important. Beijing is extremely sensitive to decapitation strikes, the idea of killing state leaders as a war tactic. The PLA's reaction, and why it feels strange. The 8th update is the reaction from China's military media, and many Chinese netizens found it unusual. Beijing Daily reported that a PLA-affiliated social media account, Jun Jinping Studio, posted a commentary titled, "Chinese people must always stay clear-minded and prepared in peace." The message said things like, "Peace never falls from the sky. War doesn't disappear just because people pray. The law of the jungle still exists. The world is dangerous, risks are everywhere. If you relax, the nation may suffer irreversible losses. Only by staying alert and preparing ahead can you protect hard-earned stability." But the strange part is this: instead of responding directly to the war itself, the military's first instinct was to educate the public. That logic feels very Chinese style. When the world changes suddenly, the system's first response is often internal messaging, teaching citizens how to think and feel. 6 key background points to understand the war's impact. To better understand what this war really means, and what it could lead to, here are 6 background points. Why are there 2 operation names? Many people noticed this war has 2 different operation names in the media: Epic Rage, or similar wording, the US name; Lion's Roar, the Israeli name. Why 2? Because even though they are acting together, the US and Israel still differ in responsibility, messaging, and tactical planning. And there's actually a third name too. Iran has its own name for its response. Iran's operation name is described as something like True Promise 4. Modern wars often sound poetic on the surface, but the naming also clearly signals who is the attacker and who is the defender. What high-level targets have been confirmed killed? Now let's talk about what the US and Israel claim they achieved in 2 days, especially leadership targets. According to US confirmation, and in some cases Iranian acknowledgement, the top-level figures killed include Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iran reportedly declared a national mourning period. Defense Minister Aziz Naserzadeh. IRGC Ground Forces Commander Mohammad Pakpour. Armed Forces Chief of Staff Abdalrahim Mousavi. Senior Security Advisor Ali Shamkhani. Then there's a second layer, key aides and senior commanders, including head of Khamenei's military office Mohammad Shalahi, an IRGC aerospace deputy commander, a senior intelligence figure long wanted by U.S. authorities, a deputy defense official, and a third layer of reporting claims family members, such as Khamenei's daughter, son-in-law, and a grandchild, were also killed. This part is presented in the script as confirmed. As always in wartime, information chaos and propaganda also explode at the same time. Why was former President Ahmadinejad targeted? A big question many people asked: why would former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad be killed? He hasn't held top office for years. The explanation in the reporting is that he lived in a neighborhood in northeast Tehran. He still had strong grassroots influence. He was seen as one of the most aggressively anti-American, anti-Israel political symbols. U.S. intelligence viewed him as a key driver of Iran's nuclear push during 2005 to 2013. He was a hardline symbol who repeatedly used extreme rhetoric against Israel. So the strike was described as a deliberate precision elimination, not an accident, including the destruction of his residence and accompanying guards. Why was Iran's current president not killed? Another key question: if this is a decapitation operation, why did Iran's current president Masoud Pezeshkian survive? According to reporting referenced here, this was not a mistake, it was intentional. Why leave him alive? 3 reasons are commonly cited: avoid total chaos. Removing everyone at once can create a power vacuum and uncontrolled collapse. Keep a diplomatic exit available. Even if you bomb a country, you still need someone to negotiate with afterward. Divide Iran internally. By eliminating hardline figures while sparing a perceived moderate, the attackers may hope to fracture Iran's internal unity. There's also a blunt practical reason mentioned: if Trump goes to war, he still needs a way to force Iran to pay the bill politically, strategically, or economically, which requires someone in the system to deal with. Have the 3 main war goals made progress? Now the big question: after 2 days of bombing, are the stated goals being achieved? Media summaries suggest the strikes focused on 4 categories: political and command centers, Supreme Leader's Office, Presidential Compound, IRGC HQ, Defense Ministry buildings, nuclear-linked sites, underground facilities, nuclear centers, key industrial zones, missile and drone infrastructure, solid fuel production sites, launch areas in multiple regions, air defense systems, remaining S-300 systems and radar networks, aiming to secure full air superiority. U.S. military messaging says this is only Phase 1. In the next 3 to 4 days, additional focus may shift toward mobile launchers, underground energy infrastructure, remaining survivable assets. The logic is simple: not just hurt Iran, but destroy the war-making system so deeply that recovery takes 10 to 20 years. What has Iran's retaliation actually done? Iran has not only been absorbing strikes, it has also been retaliating. The main pattern described here is, Iran retaliated against 8 regional countries, not just Israel, a strategy that expands the conflict outward. Key targets mentioned include, Israel, repeated missile/drone attacks aimed partly at exhausting Israel's interceptor stock. Saudi Arabia, strikes toward Riyadh and eastern regions, with some intercept failures. UAE, drone and missile activity including areas near Dubai/Abu Dhabi and key bases. Qatar, attacks on Al Udeid Air Base, U.S. military presence. Kuwait, strikes near bases and airport zones. Jordan, retaliation because Jordan participated in interception efforts. Iraq, attacks near Kurdish regions where U.S. facilities exist. Then there's an explosive political detail cited. The Washington Post reportedly claims Saudi leadership publicly opposed the attack, but privately urged Trump multiple times to strike Iran quickly. That's classic geopolitical two-faced strategy, driven by national interest, not moral consistency. Hormuz, from threat to real blockade. Now the background point that rattles global markets: Iran has moved from warning to real action in the Strait of Hormuz. 2 ships have already been attacked. Shipping routes are disrupted. The script says at least 150 tankers and LNG ships are stuck or anchored on both sides. This is no longer Wolf is coming. This is Wolf is here. OPEC held an emergency discussion about increasing output by about 206,000 barrels per day, but that cannot replace the disruption. Because normally, the strait carries about 21 million barrels per day. Even if Saudi/UAE use alternative pipelines, total bypass capacity is only around 6.5 million barrels per day, roughly a quarter. So the world faces a rigid supply shock that can't be fully substituted. That means global oil and gas prices can surge sharply. Some forecasts mentioned, if the war lasts a week, oil may jump from the $70s to above $100. If it lasts 2 weeks, some estimates push toward $140. A key question follows, would Trump stop the war if oil spikes and inflation surges? The script's answer, likely no, at least not immediately. It argues the U.S. has contingency plans such as releasing reserves and pushing domestic producers harder. But ultimately, this becomes a contest of endurance, who breaks first. And the U.S. strategy is to force Iran to break first, then shift into negotiations. China. Why is the world suddenly obsessed with China? Now we arrive at the real big theme, why are global discussions repeatedly focusing on China? Because from the outside, China may be the single country most impacted by this war. 1. China's energy shock is enormous. The script's central point is this, about half of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, not only Iranian oil, but also Saudi, UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, and more. If half of China's oil flow is disrupted while prices explode, the impact is far beyond what most people imagine. And the pain gets worse because China previously benefited from discounted oil, especially from sanctioned suppliers. Now, cheap oil disappears. Replacement oil costs more. Transport costs rise. Supply becomes tighter. That's a double hit, less supply plus higher price. 2. Key suppliers affected. The script highlights major suppliers to China that rely on Hormuz routes, Saudi Arabia, 1.6–1.8 million barrels/day. Iraq, 1.0–1.2 million barrels/day. UAE, 0.7–0.9 million barrels/day, some bypass pipeline capacity, limited. Kuwait, 0.5–0.6 million barrels/day. Qatar, especially critical, China's top LNG source, around 20% of China's LNG. So the blockade's impact is not some inconvenience. It's potentially a structural shock. 3. The deeper suspicion, is this also about China? International observers noticed something else. In recent months, the U.S. moved against Venezuela, then moved against Iran. And Venezuela and Iran happen to be two of China's most important overseas strategic energy bases, and also two key testing grounds for oil trade in RMB. Saudi and UAE resisted RMB settlement because they want dollars. But sanctioned states like Iran and Venezuela were more willing to accept RMB, often at discounted prices. So the argument goes like this, if the US knocks out Venezuela and Iran, it hits China where it hurts most, cheap energy access. Alternative non-dollar settlement. Strategic overseas supply security, and the script claims US media largely do not view this as coincidence. It quotes a logic, when multiple coincidences repeatedly hurt the same target, it stops being coincidence and starts looking like strategy. From that lens, the US goals include, stopping China from benefiting from sanctioned discounted oil. Forcing China's energy cost structure upward. Sending a strategic warning, we can close your energy valve. So beyond the Middle East, this war may also reflect a larger theme, great power competition, where pressure is applied not only directly, but by surgical strikes on the opponent's lifelines. This has been Anti-Noise Intelligence, tracking the world so you stay ahead of it. Thank you for listening, and make sure to tune in again tomorrow.